In the name of the Father, of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God. Amen. The blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. So said the 3rd century Christian writer Tertullian in his work, The Apology, or Apologeticum, a defense of the Christian faith addressed to the Roman governors who were carrying out a systematic persecution and execution of many from the church in the territories over which they ruled. Now, near the end of this work, having defended Christianity against a number of unjustified accusations that had been made against it by its opponents, Tertullian pointed out the utter futility of the efforts to eradicate Christianity by means of persecution. He stated that all the persecutions really did in the end was to make the church stronger and to draw more people into its folds. Those outside of the church beholding those going to their death for the sake of Christ, not with terror or cursing like slaves and criminals who were being publicly executed, but with steadfast peace, with hope, with joy. Those people sought to know what it was that would allow these people to die with such hope, and what it was they were dying for. Often when they came to hear of Christ and the blessings that the martyrs hoped for after death, instead of reeling back in horror or casting accusations against them of insanity, they instead joined their numbers. Or as one writer summarizing the thought of Tertullian put it, those who see us die wonder why, and when they find out, they join us. Now, one of the greatest examples of this sort of conversion is found in the life of St. Adrian, the wife of St. Natalia, who we commemorated just a couple months ago. St. Adrian lived a little after the time of Tertullian, about 50 to 100 years later, in the time of the persecutions under Diocletian, just years before the Emperor Constantine would legalize Christianity. And St. Adrian was actually a government official himself. One of his jobs was to document and register those who had been arrested as Christians as they came into the prison and awaited their own eventual execution. And time and again, having seen these Christians pass before him, their radiant joy, their peace, not the fear and trembling one might expect, he was finally overcome with curiosity, and so he stopped one of them before enrolling him and said, "Please tell me, what is it that you expect to receive from your God that makes you so willing to endure the tortures you know that await you?" And that Christian martyr, unknown to us, but certainly known to God and standing now in the midst of the saints of heaven interceding before him for us, that martyr looked Adrian in the eyes and said, "We suffer for Christ, so that we might receive the good things of God, concerning which neither eye has seen, nor has ear heard, nor has it yet entered into the heart of man." St. Adrian was cut to the heart by this and the divine grace of this man's words. He put down his pen. He rose from his seat. He walked around the table, and standing on the other side, to the astonishment of his fellow officials, he said, "Write down my name. I too wish to be enrolled as a Christian." Wow. Wow, that is amazing. Those words were so powerful that they converted him right then and there. St. Adrian is an example to us of a Christian in truth, in reality, not only in word. He took the call of the gospel seriously. He took up the cross, and he followed Christ. Now today in the church, we get to rejoice in the memory of one of our own. We, as the sons and daughters of the Russian Church abroad, we celebrate the memory of a saint who is in two ways one of our own. He was a son of Russia by birth, but a missionary priest serving here in the United States by vocation, but eventually returned to his homeland where he would be the proto-martyr of the new martyrs and confessors as the Bolshevik Revolution flared up. Now, who was this man, and what was his name? What was his life? Well, let me tell you then about St. John, the hieromartyr of Chicago and St. Petersburg. I wish to share his life with you for the specific goal of hoping that you too will catch some of the flame of the zeal that he demonstrated, like St. Adrian did that day when he asked those men before him why it was they were willing to die. And that his blood, St. John's, be not shed in vain, but might be a seed of renewal of faith within your hearts, as it was for Russia. St. John was born in July 13th of 1871 in the village in the Ryazan region of Russia. He was one of many children in a pious family. His father, Alexander, was the priest of that town, serving for many years the Church of the Theophany there. And it was from his parents, especially his father, that he would first learn to love Christ, learn the faith of the Church, learn the life of a Christian. His father, both by formal instruction in the church or through teaching the law of God in his school where he instructed, and also just through his example of love and humility, these left deep impressions on the heart, mind, and soul of the young John, and they would mold his character and set him on the path of salvation from a very young age. We then need to be very conscious of the example and instruction that we give to the young people around us. We need to realize as parents and even just as adults with the children around us, the example we set will craft and mold them in the Christian life or push them away from it. Scriptures tell us, train up a child in the way that he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. If we form our children in the faith, if we establish them and root them in the church now, they will maintain that inheritance throughout the remainder of their life. But on the other hand, Christ warns that if we do not raise our children in the faith, there are great warnings that of destruction that await us for the corruption and deception that will beset our children. For Christ said, "Whichever of you would offend one of these little ones, believe in me, it is better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck and he be cast into the sea." Now, St. John, having grown up in his parents' home, he imbibed the deep wells of Orthodox tradition. And then following in his father's footsteps, he set off on the path to prepare himself for ministry in the church. He studied at the Denki Theological School, the Ryazan Theological Seminary, in both proving himself an outstanding student and maintaining his piety in an age when many young men and women, especially in our day, and especially in our schools that are so often ideologically ill-disposed towards the church, towards Christ, that's when they lose their faith or compromise their morality. St. John maintained his faith and piety, and at the age of 20, he enrolled at St. Petersburg Theological Academy, one of the best theological schools in Russia at the time. And it was here, while preparing himself for the priestly ministry, that Father John first began to discern his particular vocation in the church. Here the young man became convinced that not only would he serve as a parish priest, but he also would take on himself the calling of a missionary, a vocation which he saw as the ideal image of an Orthodox pastor. So not long after his graduation, he received ordination in Russia, but not from the local bishop. Instead, he received it at the hands of Nicholas, then Bishop of the Aleutian Islands in Alaska, and he would return with Bishop Nicholas to the United States, first to New York, and then eventually moving to Chicago to serve there in the St. Vladimir's Cathedral, as well as at the Church of the Three Holy Hierarchs in Striator, a city not too far from Chicago. Now we have to remember that at this time, this is only 1895 or so, there were not many Orthodox churches in this country, and that would be an understatement. There had been churches in Alaska on the west coast that had about a century of tradition there, but throughout the remainder of the country, people either had never heard of Orthodoxy or churches were maybe just beginning to sprout up. Furthermore, priests serving in many of these communities had the difficulty of serving communities made up of people from a great variety of ethnicities and linguistic backgrounds. St. John, in one of his letters, recounts that his church was made up of Russians, Ukrainians, Romanians, a bunch of people from different areas in the Balkans, Arabians. So he had quite a challenge there. But also, he had to seek to work out the evangelical work in his multi-confessional context. And this Protestant environment that he lived was tempting to many Orthodox, who, seeking assimilation in their new homeland, often abandoned their God-given traditions and orthodoxy and embraced the new faith of Protestantism. This temptation was actually so great that even Father John's predecessor at his one church had left the faith and gone and become a Protestant himself. So we can see then that the temptations that we face in our day to fit in, to not stick out or be strange for the sake of our faith, are nothing new. There is nothing new under the sun. St. John set to work then in his communities. He brought stability to his parish that had been racked by the scandal of their priests leaving the church. And he worked among his parishioners, which were mostly just laborers, poor working class people from a whole gamut of Orthodox nations. He also began to reach out to those outside of the church, and even as an immigrant priest, in only 3 years of service, he brought nearly 100 converts into his church. Now, most of those did come from the Unia, but others came from Western Christian denominations. His parishes also had church schools attached to them, offering, listen to this, Saturday classes all throughout the school year, and even more during school vacations, daily instruction for children. Furthermore, they established an Orthodox mutual aid society to assist parishioners that fell on hard times with financial means and other means from those that were better off. Now, I look at all of this and I have to say, at least I'm humbled. At worst, I'm somewhat embarrassed to think that these poor parishioners, working day in and day out, paycheck to paycheck, were able to accomplish so much in such adverse circumstances as such a small minority. It really ought to inspire us who have so much more means, so much more ability, so much more time, to really think of what we could be doing for the sake of Christ here in our own community. Now, Father John continued his ministry here in the United States for another 12 years, serving both the churches in the Chicago area, building a new church with money he had helped raise on a trip back to Russia to fund it. He helped to found churches and spread orthodoxy elsewhere in this country. But eventually, considering his children that were reaching adulthood and needed their post-secondary education, and also at the insistence of his ailing father-in-law, who had asked that he come back to Russia to take over his parish when he passed, he returned to the land of his birth. In 1907, he and his family returned to Russia, and he was appointed to serve at a parish and to teach in one of the nearby secondary schools. About a decade later, he was appointed as one of the clergy of the St. Catherine's Cathedral in Tsarskoye Selo. Here, Father John thought that he would perhaps be embarking on a new phase of his ministry. He began to pour himself into his work, but just 3 months after his appointment, the February Revolution broke out in St. Petersburg, and it became very clear that dark days lie ahead. Seeing what was coming, Father John began to preach fervently to his flock, hoping to give them a firm foundation in their Orthodox faith in order to weather the storms of violence, hatred, and atheism that he knew they would face. Fast forward a few months. It's October, the end of the month. The Bolsheviks have seized power in St. Petersburg. The Red Group has begun to advance towards the village in which Father John and his faithful are living, in an effort to drive out the Cossack troops who were living there and still loyal to the provisional government. On the morning of October 30th, 1917, the Red Guard forces began to pummel the village with artillery. And the villagers ran to the church, seeking help from God. And the clergy there began to serve Moyevans and to pray for the deliverance from evil. Father John and some of the other clergy took it upon themselves to organize a procession around the village. And so, with the people and the priests and the clergy and the icons and the relics, they began to walk around the village in prayer. This procession went on into the night, the people holding their candles, singing hymns, begging God for deliverance. And at that time, the Cossack troops, the only protection that they had, fled the city themselves. It's perhaps they had hoped to draw the forces out into an open area to engage in battle, but for whatever reason, they left, leaving the people helpless. Immediately, the Red forces moved into the town, and among other atrocities, they arrested Father John. They took him out of the city. Once away from his home, a number of rifles were raised against this defenseless priest, and shots fired, bringing him to the ground. One of them even cried out, "Finish him like a dog," before subjecting this dying man to final humiliations until he eventually gave his soul into the hands of God. When his body was found in the morning, it became very clear that these villains had stolen his pectoral cross that he had received from the clergy brotherhood while still serving here in America. When he had received that cross, he said words that in retrospect turned to be prophetic. He said, "I kiss this holy cross, a gift of your brotherly love. May it support me in times of tribulation." So too, brothers and sisters, we need to realize why it is that we wear a cross. It is not merely a decoration about our necks, not merely a piece of jewelry, but a sign that we are embracing the very cross of Christ. We as priests, when we put our cross on, our pectoral cross that we wear as clergy, we recite those words of Christ. "If any man would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me." St. John put those words into action. Now, Father John's bishop, Benjamin, the Metropolitan of St. Petersburg and soon-to-be hieromartyr himself, was in Moscow attending the All-Russian Council when news of St. John's death reached him. And in a statement issued by the Diocesan Council, where the fact of this death being a martyrdom was first recognized, a statement was made. This martyrdom was, for each of us, a dire reminder, an ominous warning. We therefore must be ready for anything. It has thundered. Now is the time for us to make the sign of the cross. Little could they have known that this really was the first of what would be innumerable martyrdoms to come. And so, brothers and sisters, too, we need to be aware. It is time for us to make the sign of the cross and to live by that sign. St. John, with his passion-bearing death, became the first to be numbered among the assembly of new martyrs confessors of Russia who suffered under the communist yoke in this past century. And this was because he was not ashamed of the cross, and he and the countless others who suffered with him, making up that great cloud of witnesses in heaven, their blood became the seed of the rebirth and the renewal of orthodoxy that we see in Russia today. It also can be the seed of the birth and renewal of your faith. We need then to heed the example lived out by St. John. Let us learn from him to impart the faith and practices in Christian life to our children. Let us seek God's will and calling for our own lives and pour ourselves into it, seeking it with all our heart, our mind, and our soul. Let us see how we can serve the church and the Christian brethren and those around us who are living in the darkness of unbelief. And finally, let us take up the cross and follow Christ where he may lead, even if it is to death, but if not, where he would have us. For if we will do this, I assure you that eye has not seen, and ear has not heard, and it has not entered into the heart of man the good things that await you from God. Make the sign of the cross. Be a Christian, not in name only, but in life indeed. Holy Hieromartyr John of Chicago, pray to God for us.